Hi,
Hey,
Costa.
Michael. Uh, Zoom changed the interface and it kind of threw me off there for a second, trying to get the meeting going.
Oh, did it spur you to download some new software?
No, it just
Uh, huh.
when I click start meeting, it just launches right into the meeting, and then it launched into this new interface that said join the meeting, and then when I click join, it asked for the host to start the meeting, but I am the host, so then I
Huh.
had to exit out. It was weird. Looks like they made some updates to the platform.
Mm. Yeah, when it works well. When you have tweaks, it's frustrating. Um, anyway, well, great. I'm glad you could get on. I have 3 or 4 that said they were going to attend. Scott Johnson is a franchise consultant. He has a client that's working with me right now.
I think Thomas will be here.
Hi, Scott. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I think Thomas should be here.
Okay. Yeah, Costa last week too. There was a gentleman that was waiting online, and he said he couldn't get in. So I don't know if there
Well,
was a problem.
I get an email when people join, and he joined at like 20 minutes after.
Yeah, but there was another guy that I think thought he was on earlier, and he couldn't get in. But I know about the guy that was late. Yeah. Huh. It doesn't show up on your screen on the right-hand side. It gives you a little column. It says the name and then admit.
I get a notification at the top, and then if I
Okay.
click on participants, if you're not admitted, then there's like a waiting room area. So that part hasn't changed. That's still the
Huh.
same as it always
Okay.
has been. But it's just the three of us at the moment, so we can hang out a little bit.
Okay, cool.
We have Brian Collister's here from Houston for training. His store's opening in the next 2 weeks. So
Nice. Hey, Costa, is there have you been privy to any um any items related to the property taxes in Texas? As Peter finances these opportunities, or you look at the leases, are they any higher because of the high property taxes? And the reason I asked is someone in Dallas I'm working with wanted to put it in his pro forma, and I said, well, you only would put it in in the increased price if you do the lease program with Peter. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I have not heard of any impediments that Texas would impose. In fact, it's typically been the opposite, that Texas, because of their commercial zoning, they're typically the easiest to put a building up, because if something's zoned commercial, you can basically put whatever you want on it. But I've never heard anyone complain about property taxes being
Okay.
a impediment.
Okay.
If the lease back program purchases the land, it's just embedded in the cost of the rent. So whatever the total cost is ends up, being the total cost regardless.
Okay, I'm just gonna go to the invitation list here and just check in with 1 or 2 of these, because they told me they were
I'm
going to be on.
texting Thomas now.
Is Thomas coming on?
I'm texting him right now.
Okay.
Once he jumps on, I'll probably just cut the camera and
Yeah. Okay.
be quiet for you.
Okay. Okay. Katie, let me check with Katie. Just pull her up. Bless you.
We can probably, I'll probably kick off at 11:10.
Okay. Okay. See here.
I've never had Thomas miss a meeting, so I assume he'll be here as quick as possible. I haven't heard back.
Okay. Just see 512.
I think he just joined.
Oh, is he joined?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Although I've got to step out of the room for just 1 second.
Okay. And Katie's
And
here
then
as well.
And then
Okay.
I'll kick things off.
All right, cool.
Give me 1 second, Mike. I'll be right back.
Okay, no worries. Hi, Katie. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Michael.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Katie, I was looking for, you may be on mute. I was looking for your phone number. I think I have David's. I don't have your phone number. I wanted to just check in and see if you're still joining us, but thank you for coming on. Yeah, I always
Good
am
morning, Thomas.
sensitive to
Good morning.
the Scott, when you have a client that's, and Katie as well, when you have clients that are working full time and they're trying to investigate a business, I honestly don't know how they find the time sometimes. I know it's an important step, but
Well, we appreciate it. Thomas made it happen. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, it's and it's kind of a funny story. It's entirely my fault. I was, I mentioned my rental houses, so I was out working on rental houses this weekend and hurt my back. And then compounded that by the fact that Sunday it's like, hey, okay, it hurt. Like, I'm gonna go in and go into the gym, right, and then get my normal workout in. And between those two things, I'm moving pretty slow today, trying to get around.
yeah.
Hey guys, sorry about that. We had on Christmas Eve, a driver drove into one of our buildings and at like 1 a.m. and I've been dealing with the insurance company, and because it's very difficult to value a quick lube facility because it's a special purpose building. And so we finally got a phone call that I've been waiting for, so I had to step away. But I appreciate you guys being on the call. I'll kick right into it since it's just a small group today. We can get right to the Q&A as quickly as possible. Just a little bit about me. I start off every call by kind of going through my background, and then we get to the Q&A about the actual business. I'm from Portland, Maine, grew up in Maine, ended up in Maryland and met my wife there. And that's how I ended up in this area. We recently moved to Hanover, Pennsylvania, which is where our main headquarters is for the business. I have a background in finance, and I started off in retail banking, moved to brokerage with TD Ameritrade, and then to asset management with Merrill Lynch, and lastly, T. Rowe Price before going into the oil change business full time. When I was at T. Rowe Price, I had always, I've always been entrepreneurial since I was a kid. So I've always been looking for a business to have. And I wanted to have a business that I felt was manager centric, but not skilled manager centric, because I was enjoying my career at T. Rowe Price, and I did enjoy the finance industry. And so I had no intention of leaving my job at the time. And so I wanted a business where I didn't necessarily have to be there, and I didn't have to be beholden to a key employee. And so I looked at a bunch of different models, and this one seemed to be the least moving parts and the easiest to control from far away because there was continuity of business when the manager has their time off. The other employees just run the store, and so I never would feel like I could be held hostage by a key employee, kind of like in like a pizzeria or somewhere where if the only person who can make pizzas goes down, you have to either shut down for the day or go in and do it yourself. So opened up the first location in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I took over an existing location from a couple who was kind of just checked out and ready to be out. And I was able to implement my own philosophy in the business, and I was also able to bring to the business a lot of modern marketing technology that none of the competitors were really using at the time. It was Facebook dark posts, which is now just, Facebook ad manager. And so about 6 months into having the business, I was really enjoying it. And I actually left T. Rowe Price to do it full time. And I opened a second location in a town called Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, which is a town of 6,000 people. Kind of repeat the model to see if it could validate what we were trying to do with the oil change only model. I felt really strongly at that time that, Jiffy Lube was kind of moving away from what people actually wanted, which was the oil change only model. And they were moving towards, it wasn't called multi-care at the time, but there was kind of the precursor to the multi-care model. And so then we went from store, number 2 in Dillsburg to store number 3, which was in a suburb of Chicago. And that's where we really had to implement, procedures on running a business absentee, because I was outside of Baltimore at the time. It was not something that, I could very easily get to Chicago on a regular basis. So very early in the DNA of this business was built third-party resources and third-party processes that helped facilitate the running of the business without having to be there. And as we got larger and got to location number 10, that's when we reached out and started exploring franchising. And we met with the Frandevco people, among other franchise sales organizations that, we ended up going with Frandevco because they had some people in their system that had dealt with automotive brands in their infancy, specifically, Sung Ohm, if any of you have met Sung, he had worked with Driven Brands in the Meineke and Amco Mako brand extensively before they were national brands. And so that was interesting to me. And it's been a really good partnership. The model really resonates. We've been able to sell a lot of units, and we're getting these stores open faster than some of our competition, which is an important part of this conversation because automotive is not an easy business to do new construction. And so we've navigated the waters, I think, a lot better than even some of the more established brands in the quick lube franchising space. And so I think if we keep executing on what we're doing, we're going to be synonymous with fast oil change. And that's really what our goal is at the end of the day. And all of our franchisees are working towards that goal. And I think we're gonna get there if we keep on keeping on. So we can go right into Q&A. And Michael, I can stay until 11:30, but then I got to get back to training with Brian. Michael, you're on mute. Michael, you're still on mute. 2 years later,
hi.
2 years late, 2 years post-pandemic, and you're still
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really interesting. And I think it's important. I mentioned this to Thomas and Katie yesterday. When you opened your first location, you were working full time. And so, both of them work, and Katie's husband, David, works full time too. Well, there's just 2 of you here. Usually when we have a larger number of candidates on the call, I do a round robin, but if you could at least get one question in, why don't you go ahead and just give each other a chance? Maybe we'll switch backwards and forwards. Scott, if you have a question too, please feel free to ask Costa. So.
All right. Well, I'm never shy, and Katie and I can tag team for sure. But I have a few written down. I apologize, like I say, being a little bit under the weather. I'm not as organized as I typically am. But you started out in a couple small towns, and then kind of to me, a big jump to Chicago, right? I mean, it's not particularly close to where you started out. What made you jump to Chicago?
Well, it was Mount Prospect, and people from Chicago would literally murder me if I referred to the suburbs as Chicago, because it's one of those cities that they really take that kind of stuff personally. But yeah, so Mount Prospect is larger. It's right outside of O'Hare. I played baseball in college, and I played overseas, and I played some minor league baseball, and I've made a lot of connections across the country. One of my former teammates happened to live in Niles, Illinois, and he reached out to me, said, hey, this quick lube called Payless Express oil change is for sale in Mount Prospect. You know, I see what you're doing online. Are you interested in it? And I was 20, I think I was 26 probably. And I, you know, at that time, you know, I wasn't married, had no kids. And so I was like, you know what, why not? Let's roll the dice, take a shot. And what it really did for me was force me to implement real protocols for running the business in a way that allowed me to run it from here. And I have the same employees there today as I did in 2016 when we opened that store. And so that store is one of our more successful locations, and it's within an auto mall, so it's a little bit different. It's not, you know, it's not a standalone building. It's attached. Illinois likes to do these auto malls where they're like kind of horseshoe shaped, where the end cap is usually a big name brand and the other end cap is an oil change facility. And then in between you have like a sound shop and a muffler shop and a European shop. So that probably helped as well. But the whole process itself really set the tone for the rest of our stores, because our fourth store was in Pittsburgh, which was 3.5 hours away. And then our fifth store was in Youngstown, Ohio, which is 4 hours away. So it set the ground for us to be able to open stores that were not anywhere near where I lived.
Okay, thank you.
I think, sorry, drinking my coffee. I think one of my big questions is about marketing dollars, because as you're starting a new business, obviously marketing dollars is one of the biggest expenses. Have you determined where the tipping point is between using the majority of the dollars by the franchisees in local markets versus building some type of national campaign?
So we have Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, we're about to renew our 2023 FDD, but we are not implementing the national brand fund until we have 50 stores. And so I did not feel as though it would be proper to take those dollars out of people's businesses as they're building them to do any kind of national campaign when we don't have a national brand. So we are not enforcing the brand fund right now. And when we do finally implement the brand fund, we're not going to start it until 14 months after a store is open. So once we get to 50 locations, anyone who enters our 50 locations open, because we've sold over 150 locations at this point. But once we have 50 locations open, we will start the brand fund, but it won't be until 14 months after that we start requiring the actual receiving of that money. Now, the local ad spend is unaudited, and the only reason we reserve the right to audit how you do your ad spend. We've only had to step into one location so far. We have 9 stores that are open right now. We're going to have 15 open by the end of Q1. But we've really only had one person. We were like, okay, you know, what are you spending your money on? We're not seeing what's happening with the rest of the system. And we stepped in, we basically helped out, and we, you know, said, this is what we suggest. This is what we think you should do. It's a 2% ad spend. That's mandatory, but unaudited. And, you know, the ramp up period is typically between 9 and 12 months. That's what we say. Our industry says the ramp up period should be about 3 years. But we think because of our limited overhead and our kind of our emphasis on customer acquisition, we can mitigate that ramp up period to less than that. So I think that was a really long-winded answer to your question.
No, but I appreciate it. I do have one clarifying question. When you say ramp up period, are you assuming like cash on cash return, or are you just assuming to profit within the business?
Yeah, so I've always used, so Valvoline is the only publicly traded company in our space, and I've always used their data when I try to make my points, because it's the only thing that's available publicly. And they've traditionally they've literally had in past FDDs to expect negative cash flow through year 3. We put a large number in our item 7 for working capital to try to avoid negative cash flow. But at the end of the day, the ramp up period can be mitigated by a few factors. And really what we're talking about is net positive cash flow when we talk about the ramp up period. And so the intervals are getting longer because cars are being built better. So it's really important to be able to get cars in sooner. And so, and by having lower overhead, it just takes less time for us to get past that period of time through different efforts. Obviously, one of the things that will be helpful as we grow is being able to get national fleet accounts. And that's not going to be really possible until we have a national brand presence. But local fleet accounts are the easiest way to mitigate the ramp up period. And just to clarify on what I mean when I talk about ramp up period, you know, if you open up a pizza place and you make the best pizza in town, like day 1, that person who eats there can physically eat there 4 more times that week, 5 more times that week. If I give you the best oil change you've ever had in your life, that physical car that came in does not come in until its interval has been reached. It doesn't matter how good of a job you did. You could give them, you could give them popsicles and free puppies. They're not coming in early. Like, so you have to wait for that car to drive the 3,000 to 5,000 miles or to, 3 to 6 month interval. And so what that means is those intervals have to start overlapping before you get out of that ramp up period.
Yeah.
But numbers wise, cash flow is typically positive cash flow is what we use to indicate that.
Costa,
Thank you.
this is Thomas. I'm not sure I understood your comment. You talked about having a large amount of working capital, and you implied that it had an impact on that net positive cash flow. I mean, obviously, if you have a negative cash flow and you have that working capital, you're not at danger of going out of business or anything. But I didn't understand how having a larger amount of working capital actually affected your net positive cash flow.
No, let me clarify. That has no impact on the cash flow. It just has we want our franchisees to understand that this business requires capital to build up through that ramp up period. It doesn't have an impact on the actual cash flow.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And we put a range in there in the item 7, $25,000 to $30,000 in working capital. Because while it's possible to launch this business and run it from the cash flow from day 1, if the car count is there from day 1, which is certainly possible, we want our franchisees to be well capitalized in case that's not the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were successful, running your own stores, and now you're going through some fast growth and franchising. What made you make the switch, and tell me a little more about the training processes, procedures that you think are going to make all of your franchisees successful, right? So from going to having, 10-ish stores to jumping out, and you mentioned 150 sales relatively quickly. 150 franchisees.
Yeah, we started franchising at store number 10. I'll kind of get into the weeds with you, because I never intended on franchising. I wanted to scale corporately and just have control of everything. But I had I have my finger on the pulse of this industry, and I know a lot of people in this industry, so I know what's going on at any given time. And it's a very private equity driven business. And so one of the largest franchisees in Jiffy Lube was a group called Heartland Automotive, and they owned at one point like 600 or 700 Jiffy Lubes. And then they were bought out by another private equity group that is just known for, liquidation. And so I had this idea that there was going to be this surge of vacant quick lube buildings due to the liquidation of the Heartland properties. And that's exactly what happened. What I miscalculated was the landlord's appetite for sitting on properties at high rental rates. A very important part of my model is the low rent rate. It's important because it helps with that ramp up period to have a really aggressive lease, including, a lot of free rent or deferred rent or discounted rent in the beginning. And so these landlords that had been used to getting checks from Heartland for the last 10, 15 years to the tune of, $7, $8, $9, $10,000. It didn't matter that I would explain to them that their building was going to be vacant for the next 5 to 10 years. They'd say, fine, that's fine. I'll sit on it. And so I miscalculated that. I thought I was going to be able to go into vacant quick lubes, do a quick $10,000, $15,000 build out and open up, 100 of these things myself. And so when that ended up not being the case, because these vacant facilities got sat on by the landlords at obscene rental rates that don't really work with our model, the best way to scale, because I do believe we have a better mousetrap. I think that the model obviously kind of speaks for itself with our internal growth, but also the sale of the franchises. It required a combination of new construction and conversions. And so franchising became a way to scale that model, because I do think that we have the ability to penetrate top of mind brand awareness when it comes to fast oil changes if we execute on this.
Yeah. Costa, I'll just add for Thomas. Thomas, one thing, and I mentioned this to Katie and David yesterday, was they asked a question about how many of our franchisees, purchase a single unit and multiple units. A lot of the 150 units that Costa talks about are on development schedules. So, I think today we actually just had 5 franchisees join us in December. We have about 46. So a lot of those have purchased 2, 3. We've even had a few purchase 10 units to develop large areas. So those are on development schedules. Generally speaking, we give people about a year between each unit. So it's not like we're asking everyone to open up 150 at once.
Gotcha.
Yep. Katie, any other questions?
I don't think so, but I do actually have a 10:30 meeting, so I'm going to have to hop off, but I really appreciate your time and getting some additional insight. It's definitely going to help us make our decisions.
Yeah. Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah. Bye.
So Costa, I think you said you had a 10:30 as well. Is that correct?
I have a franchisee here in training that I wanted to get back to. I mean, if you have another pressing question,
Not pressing. I have a few, but we can save them till next week or next time. That'd be fine.
sure.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Oh, that's right. Because you asked about the training process, and I didn't answer that question at all. Let me go into it a little bit. So, once you're in the system, we partner you with our master broker, because if you're doing a new build, then you have to find ground. And so the master broker is a company called Morrow Hill based out of Dallas, Texas. They're one of the foremost master brokers for franchising. They typically only deal with large brands. The only reason they're dealing with us is because we've sold so many units. And so that's your first contact once you get onboarded onto our team. Once you found the site, the construction process kicks off with a call with our leaseback program. If you're choosing to do a leaseback program, there's basically 3 different ways that we get stores open. It's through conversions of quick lubes, through purchasing of land and building on it, and then leasing land and building on it. And so whichever direction you choose to go, if you're going to purchase the land and do everything internally, that's completely up to you. But if you do choose to go through the leaseback program with our money guy, then you're going to be put into the pipeline with them after you've found a site. They give the timeline for the construction, finding the local contractors for excavating the pit and all of that. And then once you're about 3 months away from grand opening, you'll come out to our HQ here in Hanover, PA. Either you or your general manager. It has to be a managing member. And we'll do training in the classroom here at the offices, and then we do half of it at the store down the street from the offices. We do offer grand opening assistance for an additional cost, and we'll send someone internally out to ensure you have a smooth grand opening launch. And then there's a weekly operations call ongoing for the opening operating stores to talk about whatever it is that anyone wants to talk about in the system. That's a pretty high level overview of the process.
Okay.
Just one quick add. I think, as I look at Costa and the organization, he's really embraced technology. That's the other thing, Thomas, with being able to manage locations in disparate areas. He's invested in a lot of software, so you have the ability to manage performance, through cameras, texts, phone calls, and then also software on your phone. But the other thing is there's a lot of information in our educational programs. There's modules in there. So, for example, if you have some turnover at your location, it's not like you have to send them back, to Pennsylvania to come and do training, which is very expensive and time consuming, but they can actually do it online. So there's a lot of stuff that Costa has put online.
All right. Sounds good.
Yep. Great. It sounds, Costa, like you need to move. Thomas, I guess, we'll meet up again. Next topic would be reviewing any questions you have on the FTD, and then also take a look at territory in Houston.
All right.
So,
Sounds good.
okay.
All
Great.
right. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
All right,
Costa,
thanks a
thank
lot.
you.
Yep.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Scott.